How do you do? Good evening, good morning, and welcome to the Jim Bohannon Show from Westwood One Radio. We're at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. Online, you'll find us at jimbotalk.net. You can follow me on Twitter at Jimbo Talks. You may have heard of something called the 9/11 Act, known formally as the U.S. Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act, or JASTA. We're talking with Terry Strada, a widow of 9/11 and national chair for 9/11 Families and Survivors United for Justice Against Terrorism. Thank you for joining us, Terry.
Thank you for having me.
You lost your husband in the attacks on the World Trade Center, yes?
Yes, I did. Tom worked in the North Tower of One World Trade Center, and when he was killed, we had 3 young children who were 7, 4, and 4 days old.
Oh, my. Now you have taken on this particular battle, one that I dare say that you never expected would reach quite the level that it has. For those who don't know, what exactly would JASTA, the U.S. Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act, do?
It would allow any victim of a terrorist attack on U.S. soil to hold accountable any nation that may have sponsored the attack or given any kind of aid to the terrorism to the terrorists that carried out the attack against Americans on U.S. soil.
Now, the status of this particular bill, it was vetoed by the president, so that means it was enacted by Congress. And then there was a Senate override, 97-1. The first veto override in the 8 years of the Obama presidency. Where does it stand today? Did it get overridden in both the House and the Senate? Is it therefore the law of the land?
Yes, it is now the law of the land. It was, like you said, overturned in the Senate by 97-1 and 348-77 in the House of Representatives.
Then how could Secretary of State John Kerry assure the Saudi foreign minister in a private meeting recently that the administration is working to fix the legislation? I know this is an administration that doesn't care very much about the Constitution when the President of the United States amended the Obamacare law, which a president is not allowed to do. But how can you fix something that is the law of the land? The only way I can see you could possibly fix it would be to start the process all over again, essentially a repeal mechanism, and then pass a new law. I don't see any way that they can, quote, fix this, can they? Or ruin it?
I don't see how they could either. I agree with you completely. I do not see how you can fix a bill that is the law, and what do they mean by that exactly? I don't know. You know, they don't give us any more details than a very broad statement like that. We would fix the bill. What does that mean exactly?
You are quoted as follows: Secretary Kerry is sworn to enforce the law, not work with foreign governments to undermine it. By siding with Saudi Arabia and working to torpedo JASTA, Secretary Kerry is snubbing his constitutional obligations and asking all of us to turn our backs on our pursuit of justice, unquote. Care to elaborate on that?
Well, that's exactly true. It is egregious to side with the Saudis over the personal interest of the United States citizens like myself, who have a right, to take a nation to court for any role that they played in financing a terrorist attack on U.S. soil. This is our right. This is what we fought for. This is what we've won in, Congress. So it is very egregious that he would now take the side of the Saudis and claim to, try to do something to fix the bill, to appease them, to make it less forceful that they could be held accountable. This isn't against the Saudis, the bill. It's actually against any nation that you would find culpable in a terrorist attack on U.S. soil. It just so happens that the 9/11 families do have a pending lawsuit against Saudi Arabia for the 9/11 attacks, and this argument should be played out in a courtroom right now, not by paying, lobbyists $1.3 million a month to fight it, with lies and mistruths about the bill.
And we should repeat that number for those who weren't paying attention at this late hour. The Saudi government is reportedly spending more than $1.3 million per month on at least 10 high-powered Washington lobbying firms to try and torpedo the 9/11 bill, which is, of course, no longer a bill, as you note, by having been passed, vetoed by the president, and the veto overridden. It is now the law of the land. That's what they're spending all this money on. The argument, of course, that has been made against this bill was, oh, well, we certainly support the 9/11 families, yada, 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 but this would open the door to the United States being sued in every country in the world for this, that, or whatever. Is there any validity to this slippery slope argument regarding JASTA?
No, absolutely not. And it's ludicrous that is their argument, because JASTA is very finely, narrowly crafted to do one thing and one thing only, and that's to hold any nation accountable for funding a designated terrorist organization for carrying out a terrorist attack on U.S. soil. So this would not open up the floodgates of lawsuits against the United States, because we are not funding designated terrorist organizations around the world to carry out terrorist attacks, killing innocent civilians around the world. We don't do that. So it doesn't open up the floodgates. It doesn't. Our diplomats are not at risk because they are protected under the Vienna Convention. Businesses and companies and individuals cannot be sued if JASTA is now enacted, because they are protected under different treaties and different acts. There's all kinds of things set in place that do protect our military, our U.S. citizens across the globe, and JASTA does not disturb any of those.
We're at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. We're looking at a law of the land which the administration has now promised to, quote, fix in dealings with a foreign country, in this case Saudi Arabia. That is to say, it's the law. There's nothing fixable about it except if you were to repeal it and replace it with some other law. That's the only constitutional fix. Constitutional, of course, not a term with which this administration is greatly in love, but it remains the rule book for the country. We'll come back and we'll talk some more with Terry Strada. 1-866-50-JIMBO is our number. Their website, by the way, passjasta.org, even though it in fact has passed, but PASSJASTA.org. We're at 1-866-50-JIMBO, and we'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show. We're talking to Terry Strada, 9/11 widow, national chair of the 9/11 Families and Survivors United for Justice Against Terrorism. And we talk with Dennis in Worcester, Massachusetts. Hello, Dennis.
Hello.
What's on your mind?
So just I haven't been hearing the radio in the last few minutes, so I don't know what might have been said, but I mean my concern with the bill is I think if you were to ask someone like the Pakistani civilians or Afghani civilians who've been killed by our drone strikes, I think they might say that maybe we are committing terrorist acts.
Well, they might say it. First of all, I strongly disagree. If they would take care of their own problems and eliminate the terrorists that they're harboring, they wouldn't have the problem in the first place. But even beyond that, of interest in this discussion is whether or not this law in some way would leave the United States vulnerable to some kind of lawsuit, Terry Strada.
Right, and I can answer to the drone attacks that the United States government already has a fund set up in place that when someone is accidentally killed, a civilian, or injured by a drone attack, that they can apply to this fund and they are compensated, whether it's a loss of life or a loss of limb. So our government already takes care of, accidents and mistakes that are made. So you cannot equate that to what JASTA does, which is hold a nation accountable for funding the terrorist attacks against, United States citizens on American soil. There's just no comparison.
1-866-50-JIMBO, our number, 1-866-505-4626 on the Bohannon Show with Terry Strada and Matthew in Lincoln, Nebraska. Hello, Matthew.
Hey, Terry.
Hi.
I just wanted to say, it's kind of along the lines of your last caller, with all these multi-nation agreements we're in, like NATO and UN and stuff, we're saying that we recognize, Saudi Arabia as supporting a terrorist organization. And how do we, discern, say, Syria, where we have U.S. and Russians backing both sides of the people there? How does that prevent Syria and the victims in, say, Aleppo from, saying that the U.S. was supporting terrorism or saying that Russia was supporting terrorism? Who determines that in coming back in this bill?
All right. Well, first of all, you don't have to worry about the Russians, because I can guarantee you the Russians would have no truck with anybody who tried to accuse them of terrorism. They'd probably take the accusation and put it on their Christmas cards. But Terry, does again anything in the JASTA law would anything in that allow the United States or any official in the United States to be sued based on what we have done in Syria?
No, it does not, because officials and military contractors, citizens are all protected under, like, the Anti-Terrorism Act that exists. So no civil action could be brought against any agent or officer or employee of a foreign state or agency thereof acting, within their official capacity. Again, it's about any nation that financially supports a designated terrorist organization. So the only reciprocal law that could come out of JASTA with any other country would to be the same thing, hold a nation accountable for the funding of a designated terrorist organization that then carries out a terrorist attack. So all of these other things that are going on are protected under other treaties or other acts that JASTA does not, change in any way, shape, or form.
JASTA, I understand, will allow a consolidated lawsuit by 9/11 families, survivors of the attacks, and several insurance companies to proceed in the Southern District of New York Federal Court as lawyers try to prove this involvement by the Saudi government. I doubt that it would be that hard to do. But then what? I mean, to what extent will Saudi Arabia say, oh, well, if a U.S. court says we got to pay, then I guess we got to pay? Or are they just going to simply tell you to take a flying leap?
I guess we have to wait and see how that all plays out. I don't know the answer to that. I know when other countries like Libya, was held accountable for the Pan Am, the Lockerbie flight, that, they did have to pay out. They didn't get away with just not paying. But that's time will tell. What we want is to get our evidence into a courtroom and to have, our side told, and what we know, the way that Saudi Arabia was involved with 9/11, we want the truth to come out, the accountability and the justice. How it gets paid down the road, I don't know exactly.
Mike in Pittsburgh, welcome to the Jim Bohannon Show.
Hi, how are you?
Fine.
Actually calling because, this is something that I don't know much about as far as this JASTA bill. I've heard about it, but my question was what constitutes funding of a terrorist from a terrorist state. It's obvious to say that there's a lot of homegrown terrorists in these terrorist states. So, I mean, is there any wording that really constitutes what it is that would be considered funding? And I'm just curious. I support this personally. I think something has to happen for the families, and I support this, but obviously it seems like it's groundbreaking. You're kind of treading on new ground here.
All right. Well, point well taken, Mike, and we should get into that. I guess the key factor here would be proving Saudi government involvement. Now, certainly we know that the vast majority of the 9/11 hijackers were Saudi nationals. That does not in and of itself prove that the Saudi government was behind it or financed it or looked the other way when they shouldn't have. What would be the level of Saudi government acquiescence to the 9/11 attacks that would cause them to be liable for this suit under the provisions of JASTA?
From what I can tell is the evidence would have to prove that. So, what we have mostly is following the money trail, and you take the money trail and you back it up to where, it was financing the terrorists while they were here in this country, and you can see just by the 28 pages that Prince Bandar's wife was transferring money, to these so-called handlers of the hijackers while they were here in this country. And so where was that money coming from, and who ordered that money to be, designated to terrorists? So it's just following the money trail will get us hopefully to the truth. But when your caller said something about treading on new territory, it's not treading on new territory as much as you would think, because there is an exception already to the Foreign Sovereignty Immunity Act that you are not entitled to immunity for a terrorist act. And the problem that occurred with our case is that the courts misinterpreted the law and said that the entire tort had to happen within our borders. And with the case of 9/11, a lot of the financing was given outside our borders. So it's kind of ludicrous that if you give the money inside, like New York City, and you say, go, blow up that building, oh, okay, I can hold that nation accountable for that act. But if they give the money in Geneva, Switzerland, and they blow up the same building in New York City and they kill us, I can't hold you accountable. So JASTA is closing a loophole to an already existing exception for funding or for, any terrorist act on American soil.
Let's talk to David in Troy, Alabama. Hello, David.
Hello?
Yes, welcome. You're on the radio.
Yeah, my question is she concerned about the other nations, taking into consideration the other nations? We don't control their laws, so what's to prevent them from just making a law to say it's okay to sue the United States?
Well, any country can do whatever they want, with or without JASTA. They can create any law they want. But if they were to create a law that mirrored JASTA, it would be to hold any nation accountable for funding a designated terrorist organization. I mean, that would be the reciprocal law. They can do that if they want. Maybe some countries probably already have those laws on the books. This one is to protect Americans from future terrorist attacks by stemming the flow of money that continues to flow to these terrorist organizations.
I agree with you, but what's to prevent them from just making a law arbitrarily just because we're Americans?
Nothing. Nothing is. That's just what Terry noted. There's nothing. They can do that now, although they would be hard-pressed to certainly prove terrorist involvement on the part of the United States. But, they could do it. They could do it now, but this law doesn't make that any more or less likely to happen. To Brett in Akron, Ohio. Hello.
Oh, yeah, I just had a question about that new law. It seemed to me that we went to war with Iraq because we were pretty sure they were the, people who attacked us.
Well, we went to war with Iraq because they refused to abide by several United Nations resolutions regarding weapons of mass destruction, which, by the way, we know they had because they used chemical weapons against both the Kurds and the Iranians. Nobody went to war with Iraq because we were under the impression that they were behind 9/11, although there were contacts between terrorist organizations and the regime of Saddam Hussein. Anyway, just to clarify that. In the time we've got left, about 15 seconds, Terry Strada, what now?
Well, we're going to move forward with our lawsuit, but for anybody that, doubts that this legislation was ever carefully reviewed, it was introduced nearly 7 years ago. It came out of our Senate Judiciary Committee twice without objection. It was voted out of our Senate twice unanimously and once out of the House of Representatives unanimously.
There you go.
Before we overrode.
Well, we're going to have to, the 15 seconds, unfortunately, is the limit, so we'll be back in a moment.